German, but it will take too much time, like twice that much, because I have to think a lot for every word I have to say. So I'm more comfortable in English nowadays. There was a time I could speak German very well because I did 3 months in Zurich, so I even understood Schweizerdeutsch at that time, which is that's like those kind of words. So I do it in English. I can understand German if you have any question, just ask in German. Anyway, and as Oliver said, we've got a tight time schedule. So I have to rush. This is a presentation for 45 minutes or an hour. I skipped something. I skipped the live demos. I recorded them so they can't go wrong. That's one advantage. And it's a little bit faster because it's just like a few minutes from the screen recording. A little bit about me. I'm Roel Hartman from the Netherlands. One of the Oracle ACE directors. Wrote these 2 books, chapters in both. And been presenting all over the world. That's also at DOAC here like 2 years ago, I guess. So, testing. Just jump in. We got a little. There are different types of testing you can do. If you're testing your applications, you're starting with unit tests, and on top of unit tests, you do an integration test, bigger building blocks, and when you've done with your integration test, then there's an acceptance test. Usually that's an end user or representative of the end user organization. So that's usually the way it's built up. And in theory, we all know the bigger part of our test effort should be unit tests. And smaller part integration test, and then when everything works out, in the end, the acceptance test is just a breeze for the end user. And why is that? Because the later you find errors in your system, the more expensive it is to solve them, because you have to go back, do the unit test, integration test, and go to all the integration street again. So that's a theory. We all know this. But usually it's like this. In the places where I come, we do a little bit of unit tests as programmers, as developers, a bit more integration tests, and then we say, go to the end users and just give me the errors, find the errors, and report them back to me. We will fix them later on. And we all know it's wrong, but we always do it this way. Now, why is that? Why do we do it the wrong way? Because it's boring. We don't want to test it. Developers hate testing because they think it's boring stuff. Just trying things out, finding errors. We don't even make errors, so how can we even find errors? So that's a difficult thing. So it's boring. So the solution is to make it a little bit more exciting. Testing can be more exciting than just trying things out, trying to break your program or other people's program. By automation, we can just automate it because we are good in automating things. That's why we develop code, and we also can develop code for testing. And when we automate things, we can reduce the time to market because it goes faster. Just say, okay, we don't have to rerun all the tests by hand. We just push a button, or not even push a button, push a file somewhere, and then all your tests will run during the night. If you automate it, you can find defects early. You can even find defects, find more defects, because you can just, every test you can come up with your program, you can run over and over again. So even when you make a small change, you can just run all the tests, and then you find out that your small change did something very wrong in the other part of the system. And of course, it's more fun. So we've got these 3 levels, unit tests to start with. We can automate unit tests also to start with. In a PL/SQL or in an APEX environment, we can, our building blocks, our units, the smaller units are piece of PL/SQL packages. PL/SQL functions, procedures should all be in a database. There are multiple reasons for putting all our PL/SQL in a database and not within Apex as just pieces of text. And one of them is you can easily test them when they are in the database. And these people over here on top of the building seem like they're hanging there. Or this is the building where Larry Ellison's his office on the top floor. These are people that are doing something there or just hanging there, didn't make the target or something like that. Or our window cleaners. So if you want to test stuff, if you want to test unit, if you want to have the unit test, you need very good specifications. For every building block, you need to know what goes in, what does it do, what goes out. So not only in and out, but also it can make some changes in tables, for instance. So when you run a function, it can give a result back, but it also can do some other changes as well. So you need specifications for all of them. One of the tools that can do unit tests is Quest Code Tester. Does anyone know this tool? Worked with it? No, nobody has, because it's expensive, because it only runs on Windows. And I got a Mac, so it doesn't run on my machine. So, not using it. This one, for instance, it's better. Maybe not for testing, but it's free. And I'm from the Netherlands, so that's good. Free is good. I don't know how it is in Germany, but in the Netherlands, free is good. And it runs on a lot of platforms. So, how does it work if you want to set up a unit test in SQL Developer? There is another tab. At View, you said Unit Tests, and there you get another tab where you can define a library of tests. Start with your first test, open up your connection, and you see your functions that you can test. Click on one and just click to the wizard. Give the name a test. Test the login function, for instance. And you can define a startup process, and you can specify parameters, input parameters and expected output parameters. For instance, this one, the input parameter is John, the password, you can just say secret in this case, and I expect the output to be false, because it's not the correct username and password combination. And I can specify validations and a tear down, so in the end I can just, in the startup and tear down, I can set up things, feed data into tables or remove it from tables. Once I got my function, I can just say, this is another view of the same data. Of course, it just was a wizard, and now you see all the data. And I can have multiple implementations of my test. So you can run once I specify my test, I can run it a couple of times. With the wrong username and password, for instance, with the correct username and password, just to see whether it works or not. So the correct username and password, you see if you scroll down here a little, you can see here that I put in the wrong, so the correct username and password, which is demo, and it should return true, and the wrong username and password we already have. And then I just say, okay, I'll add another one. Exception, it's expected to fail. So this one should fail. So you can run, say, test can run okay or fail, and maybe a failure is good in the end. For testing, that's possible. So now I specify 3 different types of tests. So this one I specified it's true, demo, but it's your wrong username and password, so it will fail in the end. So now I run it, and you see here that after a run, you see this close process, and the expected result from the expected result doesn't match the real result. And you can run those tests by hand if you have a lot of them, but you can also run from the command line. So if you've got something nifty as a Hudson interface or like continuous integration with Hudson or Jenkins, something like that. You can also put in a SQL developer command line interface on the background there that can run all the tests every night, for instance, or every time you deliver a new version of your application. So that's the way to do unit tests. If you haven't tried this before, just pick one of your functions or procedures and see what happens, and just easy, go follow the wizard, and you can just create a combination, or you can just create a complete test suite for all your functions, just step by step by step. There's always test data is stored in the database. It's a separate test repository. The first time you start it up, it says, I want to create a repository. And you say, okay, go ahead and have the data stored there. This so you can retrieve all your information as well from the database, from the same tables. The advantage of very thorough testing, very thorough unit test for all your code, is that your test code may be even bigger than the code you want to test. So that's something you have to think about. And also I saw a tweet once from Gwen Shapira. Says the same thing: when you have a unit test, 90% of the time you spend debugging the errors in the test themselves. So it takes also a long time. So you're ending up in a vicious circle if you don't watch it. And you get a lot of reactions in this whole thread of talking about errors and unit tests, etc. Integration test, one level up, is this easy. It's more of the same. Because within SQL Developer you can just make tests based on other tests, etc. You can just top them up on top of each other. And in the end, so your API with Application Express, the code you run from your Apex application is the highest level you can test within SQL Developer. Acceptance tests, so what the end users see, is something different. So we can't use SQL Developer for that. We have other tools. And we have also different criteria. Not only functionality, does it do what it should do, but also, for instance, something like performance. Does it work as fast as we expect? There are some tools for that as well. One of them is GMeter. And GMeter, I said it performance, but also a little note, in fact, it's load. GMeter doesn't measure performance, but it measures the load, and with load and performance has some kind of a correlation with each other. And another thing you have to be aware of if you're using GMeter, and I'll have a small demo in a minute. GMeter is not a browser. So if your application has a lot of JavaScript, a lot of dynamic actions, those won't be run when you do GMeter. GMeter stops where the browser begins. So it delivers the data to your server, and then it says, okay, timing. But what if you have, for instance, in the previous project, as a government side, we had we used Internet Explorer, of course, 7, of course, and which is very slow. JavaScript engine is very slow. So because we are developers, we don't develop using Internet Explorer, we're using Chrome or Firefox. And pages will be ready for input within a sub-second. But in Internet Explorer, it took 20 seconds. So you have to rewrite the whole JavaScript to optimize it for Internet Explorer as well. So you won't find this stuff when you're running Gmail. It doesn't run scripts. The idea is you record as one user. You just record all the steps you want to take in your application, and then you play back as many. So you can just mimic. I'm 50 users now, I'm 100 users, etc. If you are recording it, you're just saying that Apache GMeter is a proxy, setting up as a proxy between your browser and your web server, so something in between, and everything that goes through is recorded by GMeter. Just say, okay, give me everything, point star, that goes through and record that. And the result is something like this. So I've made a recording for Apex, like entering an order, something like that. And if you see what's everything that's been recorded, you see a lot of familiar things like a step ID and an instance and a flow ID and a session ID, of course, and all kinds of addresses, apex/f, and the www flows show a lot of, and all the images, of course. You see everything that's being recorded, everything that's being retrieved from the server goes through Apache and it's recorded. And once you've recorded that, you can just say, okay, I want to mimic 10 users, and I can specify a ramp-up period. So those 10 users, how fast should it be at 10? Can be in 5 seconds, so it goes every second there will be 2 added to the pool. Or in 5 seconds it will be a little bit longer, and just specify everything and make loops, etc. And once you've run it, you can see here there are 10 out of 10. All those things flow by, how long it will take for every resource to load. And in the end, you can create graphs out of it. And all this data can be just specified to file and be saved there and load into Excel and create better graphs, because the graphs in GMeter aren't that nice, but it gives you a lot of information how what's performing good and what's performing less good. So you can always say, okay, I will be using 50, I will be mimicking 50 users, and ramp-up period will be 50 seconds, so it goes from 0 to 50 users in 50 seconds. So they don't do the same thing at the same moment, but just over time. So within your one server, you can just say, would my application be capable of serving thousands or maybe 10,000 users? This is one of the tools you should check into. And this is one of the graphs you've seen. If you're, you will see if you crank it up to enormous amount of users, then at a certain moment in time you see little spikes going up, so your server won't be able to cope with it anymore. Another way to have a look at the performance of your application, of course, is getting to Apex itself. Usually the logging in Apex is switched on in every production application, luckily, and it saves every request from the database. So it also measures how fast is the data served out of the database. So like GMeter measures it's from the endpoint, just like I said, like just before the browser. That's the endpoint of a GMeter measures this, and Apex measures its performance just when the data goes out of the database. Because what happens to the network, etc., Apex doesn't know. So for instance, this real life example, you can see that this this page 7, has like over 1 million page events and a very large weighted average, because there's the maximum elapsed time. There were some issues with this screen, of course. Maximum elapsed time was very big. Average is okay, but there are some pointers, because this is very heavy used application. It's thousands of users as well. But this is the easiest. If you have any performance problems with the application, this is the first thing you should look into, because it's already there. Just open it up. And if you don't have Apex, an Apex builder front end in your production, usually you don't, this data is still there in tables like Apex workspace activity logging, something like that. Just look for the views that have log in their name, and you will find them. So this was the performance count, sorry, the performance side of things, and now we go to the functionality. For functionality, there is another tool called Selenium. Everyone heard of it? Yes. Selenium does front-end testing. So what the user sees and does is recorded by Selenium. It's on Firefox only, so it runs on Firefox. It's the extension on Firefox. Because of one button. It's an extension on Firefox. Just download and install it, and you get another menu in your Firefox browser. So it runs on every platform as well. And it has the same idea as a Gmeter. Record, just press on the record button, this one, and do your things in your Apex application. Enter an order. You will see a little demo in a minute. And it will record every step, and you can just play it back as often as you want.
With the replay.
Yeah.
So you record it with a specific session ID.
Yes.
And when you start replaying it, it will it work?
Yeah, I know what you're saying, Mark.
So the first
yes.
page hits, and then you go to the other page.
You can set variables. You have to.
But you have to do that.
You have to tweak. There are some drawbacks. One of them is this kind of session idea, of course. There are some. You can save things in variables and reuse them later on.
Which things do you have to tweak? So
This is one, like session. Another one is depending on how you set things up. If you click on a button, it records. It says you click button with ID is with a certain number. Usually the number. If you don't specify your own ID within Apex, then the button is just an ID with a big number. In other environments, if you just say go from development to test, and I want to retest that number might be different. So you have to look into the way of whether you want to keep those numbers there. You can either say, okay, I'm going to use a custom attribute, like a custom ID for every object, which is rather cumbersome, or you have to change your test in a way that the right button is selected. So it's sort of CSS selectors you can use. They're very similar to the regular CSS or the regular jQuery selectors, but there are some quirks that you can select by name and by location, even by location of a button, which is very dangerous, of course. If you move it a lot around, then it won't be recognized.
Do you have any issues with the sort of page submission ID, whatever? So when you render the page and there's a
No, I've never encountered any submission at least. I've got a test here, I can run it as often as I want. So here we're running it again. This is the one I can run as often as I want, because it's a record. But I could do it live. So we got a test suite, which is a combination of tests. You saw the other ones, like a login, change customer address, create a new customer, delete it, etc. So there are a couple of tests that will be run. And now I'm just saying, there you go through this test. This is in the real life speed, and make all those changes. And you can see, oh, there's a mail coming in, because at that time it's said. So even these kind of errors, you can detect them. So if I enter a wrong postcode, for instance, I should get an alert box. So check on this alert box. So you can see here, click and wait button contains something. So that's another way of not using an ID, but button contains save or whatever.
You have used the web test before, that can also like specify things on the page.
Yeah, and you see here expat, kind of expat selectors for selecting anchors, etc. So all those errors, like deleting a customer where it still has an order, you can just catch them all, try them everything out. And now you've run. Have we already done? Now wait for text present. So you see here wait for text present, search for text present. So there are all kind of different languages. There are about over 100 commands within Selenium that you can use. And a lot of them are very logical. Other ones are more cryptic. But if you see things like this, like key press, no, that's not so cryptic. That's the key pressed. You want and get a type. You can just say the target is ID is P1 search, which is of course this box over here. You can just type in any text in there, and this is all recorded. But you can also change these things by hand. And in the end, it's all an HTML file. So if you don't like this user interface, you just open up in any editor and edit this HTML file as well. It's very powerful. So these are quite a lot of text. I did a change of customer address. I created a new customer. I deleted the customer. I tried to delete the same customer. I just deleted it again, so I couldn't find it. I recreated it, created an order, deleted the customer, again with an order, which shouldn't work. And delete the last order, delete the customer. So I've got a lot of tests. And once you recorded this, you can just run it over and over again as often as you want. It's very powerful.
Can you add data, test data dynamically? For instance, I mean, here you respond, so you delete first and then insert. But sometimes you cannot do that. So you have to pick a customer to do something with them, and you're not allowed to delete it, for example. So in those cases, you will always have to generate new, fresh, random test data. Can you do it?
For random test data?
Or give a list, whatever, that you prepare, or a SQL statement, or an XML file.
Good question. Good question. Can you generate? Well, in the end, it's an HTML file which I could create on the fly, of course. But I don't know if you want to do it, but
Roel,
yeah.
you talk about the backend functionality that you are able to run it with the server script and in the server like that without the plugin.
Yeah, because this is run from a browser and continuous integration environment. You want to run it somewhere on a server, so you can just say this test converted to Java, converted to Python, save as Java, save as Python, save as like 3 or 4 other languages. Just save it, and then you can get a Java file or a Python file, and you can edit that one as well, of course. And then you can do all your little magic, of course, in SQL or Python, and run it from a server.
Yeah. And for creating the data, you can of course create a predefined job, which creates first the user or something like with the other user data, and then you make the relogin in the second step and work with the data, so that you create over the UI the data. Or you can also with Jenkins create SQL scripts and fill in or import the data before, so we can combine it. And this functionality, if you use Java, for example, you can define tests by writing Java code directly and run it with Hartman over also using Selenium, the framework. So in Java, you can directly define also tests.
Yeah, you can. Yeah, if you want, you can just skip Selenium front end and the whole recording thing, and just say, okay, just give me all the Java classes that Selenium has, and write all your tests straight from Eclipse or whatever.
Another interesting thing, you can define the server that you use Internet Explorer, for example, or an Atlas browser, or use parallel sessions. So that you create something like nodes, you call it, and he runs 3 or 4 sessions parallel. So you use different browsers to test it. For example, the Atlas browser is many more powerful or faster, and then you can test very fast what the browser does, but always using the whole JavaScript. Not a backend test, it's a full test of the functionality of the application with JavaScript. But
And also mobile, etc., in mobile browsers.
So then I wouldn't actually need JMeter tests anymore. I mean, you always had to decide between doing a load test, which was not functional, or a pure functional test, which didn't do any performance. So with that approach, you could do both.
This is more This is more functional than Lowe's.
Well,
So you can create multiple sessions, but that's more aimed at testing different browsers. So you won't span up like go and do this for 50 Internet Explorer users or something like that. You say just do it for Internet Explorer, one for Safari or Mac, and one for.
Even on the server, he opens the server. So even if it's the backend, he uses the engine and calls it, and nodes are more usable, only usable as far as I know, with different browsers each time, because if you use more than one Internet Explorer, it comes in conflict, I think, with sessions or something.
It starts
Yeah,
the
it starts
actual
it.
program.
Okay, yeah.
And we wrote the script.
Even if it's not
Yeah, you can get a very complex infrastructure if you want to test all the browsers.
Doesn't it generate Java class?
There's
For starting the because with web text, for example,
Yeah.
they had Rhino or whatever. This is a JavaScript engine which was headless and running purely in the backend.
Mhm.
So they were doing the HTTP requests and getting everything back, and it was purely run in the backend. So they could have multiple processes running at the same time.
Yeah, those are different ones. And the current client we're using, that is more like we got a lot of web services to test. So we're using SOAP UI for testing web services. And therefore, we also generate data. Not generating, we're getting data from Excel sheets. So we're reading Excel sheets with all the different web service calls, with all the parameters and what to expect, and writes data back into the Excel sheets as well. So that's a different, but that's a different environment, nothing to do with APEX itself.
you could go go
So this is, let's move this in the other way. This is what it looks like. You can just download it on your Firefox, play with it. It's for free. You have to learn another language. It's Celanese. They call it themselves Celanese. I didn't make it up. Because all these selectors, they look a lot like CSS selectors and jQuery selectors, but they're just little different things as well. And also, of course, all these commands are different different commands than we know. So you have to learn them. When do you use something like this? You can just do a manual test or do a 100% automated coverage. Of course, 100% automated coverage takes a lot of time. It's very expensive to do so. So you have to be aware. It's not for every project you will do something like that. If, for instance, if there's a higher risk involved, then you might do 100% automatic coverage. If your application fails and people die because of that, then 100% automatic coverage might be an issue. I can't think of one maybe, but I know not APEX applications, but raw applications that have something like that. In the Netherlands, we got an application that closes a big river to the North Sea. So in certain circumstances where the water is high in the Rhine and there's a storm on the other side, etc., there are a lot of parameters. In that case, this thing closes. If it doesn't close, part of the Netherlands will flood. So that's something that you might want to test very thoroughly. The specification should be stable as well. If you're doing some kind of very agile approach, this might not work, because if your specifications change in every new sprint, you don't want to rewrite all those tests, of course. Use customer base. The more customers and the more different kind of browsers, the more you need to test, and the more you go to this 100%. If you want to know more about APEX, this is the conference to go to, of course. You've probably seen this one before, Kscope, in the end of June. Tickets are still available. And there are a couple of people here that will be present there. Oliver will be there. Dietmar will be there as well. Yeah, of course you are. It's great. It's like for Apex, it's like 4 days with 3 parallel tracks only for Apex. So we've got 45 sessions Apex in every level of experience, from beginner to high end. Yeah, 30 minutes. I did good. Okay, thank you.